G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. I need chocolate biscuits, but I'm also just about out of spring vegetable cup of soup. So I could go to Glen Innes and get the chocolate biscuits, but to get the spring vegetable soup, I'm going to have to go to Deepwater. So that means I've got to ride the bike to Deepwater up the back road, unless I want to burn fossil fuel to get there. And there've now been 11 installments in the Trumpocalypse Chronicles. I guess today we make up the dozen because, yeah, there's been a few changes over there. Don't know if you can see that, but 3969 kilometres. So somewhere along this Deepwater and return ride, that's going to click over 4,000 kilometres, which at an average speed of 40 kilometres an hour will mark the 100-hour mark. Spent sitting on this tiny little electric chook chaser, and it was in honour of the approaching, well then approaching 100-hour mark, still very closely approaching 100-hour mark. That's why I succumbed to the vanity of the Biggles Marlin Brando Fonz fantasy jacket, and I got to say I am enjoying it. The second trip wearing it, I got the biggest fright I've had so far riding the bike. That was when my regime of looking straight ahead for 5 seconds and then looking at the right-hand mirror for 1 second and the left-hand mirror for 1 second, and I didn't know I was doing that till I saw the shadow of my head on the chest camera with the sun behind me. But it means that up there on the highway in front of Tandera Park, Matthew Taylor's place, just this side of it, I looked in my left mirror, all clear, 250 metres visibility behind me. Right, looked straight ahead for 5 seconds, looked in my right mirror, all clear. Looked in my left mirror, and the mirror was full of motorcar, and the motorcar was simultaneously getting bigger in the mirror and decelerating. And just as I started to swerve to go left and get out the other side of the fog line and get out of its way, I realised that it was sweeping across the mirror as it was getting so big it was, and I saw the right-hand headlight sweep out across my mirror, and I looked over there and scowled, if you can scowl when your head's in one of them and you're wearing the blue goggles. But anyway, I duly scowled at him as he went past, and he was still doing somewhere between 2 and 3 times my speed as he went past me on the inside, me being in the centre of the lane because I figured I had at least 12 seconds warning before anybody I saw in the mirror could draw level with me if I'm doing 50 kilometres an hour and they're doing 100 kilometres an hour, because 50 kilometres an hour is 30 miles an hour, which is 50 feet per second, and 250 metres is 800 feet. And in the time that it takes them to get from where I see them, 800 feet behind me, at 100 feet per second, I've gone another 400 feet in front of that. So there you go, 12 seconds for them to catch up to me if we're both doing our lawful speed. For him to have gone from nothing in the mirror to 7 seconds later and the thing's full of motor car, he has been 150 feet per second, 160 feet per second in order to catch me up before I could see him in the mirrors. I don't know what he thought he was doing, the little boy racer. Kilometre or so up the road, he was pulled off to the side and he was trying to wave me in to talk to him, but I don't know. I don't know what my grandfather's walking stick would have thought of him. Might have bitten him, eh? So I didn't talk, I just come on home. Anyway, yeah. So far, the biggest fright I've had in 4,000 kilometres, and I was wearing my brand new jacket, and if I had have been wearing the jacket or a frilly pink petticoat, it wouldn't have made a ball hair worth of difference. I think the only things that saved me would be the yellow patches on the back of the pannier bags and the orange mesh vest that I'm not wearing now because I'm going to wear the camera mount here to Deepwater and back, because my commitment to chronicle the Trumpocalypse is pretty strong at the moment. So we'll see how we go. There we go. That should be recording. And I have adjusted the camera mount, so hopefully you don't get a face full of nothing but motorcycle dashboard. So, as it were foretold within the prophecy, over in the autarky of Madagascar, things have gone from bad to worse. Maybe 3 weeks ago, when I was talking to a friend of mine who's been aware of accelerationism and all that it implies as a strategy, a tactic and a movement, for years before he succeeded in getting my attention and getting me to pay attention to, well, to notice the accelerationists and take them seriously. I said to him maybe 3 weeks ago that I'd been watching a documentary which had mentioned the Battle of Lexington Green and Concord on the 19th of April. And they said that that was what started the American Revolution. It was the first time the American colonists saw themselves as being citizens of America, to the point where they were prepared to shoot at the loyal redcoats who were over there in the service of their king. And I had just a flash of inspiration that the most likely date for the American constitutional loyalists to express their displeasure against what's been going on since the inauguration, with a hand not on the Bible, would be the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington Green and Concord. And the first time their ancestors unloaded on the red coats will be the trigger for the first time they unload on the red hats. But on hearing that, old mate the accelerationist said, oh no, it couldn't possibly come about anything like as fast as that, you know, like, yes, they're going to get cranky, and the crankiness will build up to the point where they want to become violent, and they might even want to run a counter coup against what's happening with Muscastani Doge. But he said it won't be now. You know, how long till the midterms? You know, I said, well, middle of 2026 as far as I know. But I reckon at the pace things are changing at the moment, just as Trump forecast when he was talking to the Christian evangelicals when they were passing out in the heat. And he said he didn't care about them, he only wanted their vote. And they were only going to have to vote just this once, because after this they weren't going to need to vote. They'd never need to vote again, just vote this once and let him and his evangelical mates get in. And the people who'd voted him in once to stack the Supreme Court so that Roe versus Wade could be overturned, they thought it was great. But just in the past couple of days, all of the American legal, beagle and briefcase type pundits who actually know what they're looking at and know what they're talking about they've been bemoaning the fact that all the checks and balances are being simultaneously dismantled, and yes, perhaps the courts might come up with rulings that go against him, but that'll take time, and by the time that time has expired, it'll be too late, because everybody who's been fired will have either failed to make their mortgage payment and become homeless, or found another job somewhere else. And even when the court reinstates them, who the hell would go back to working for an employer who treats them like that? So all the administrative, regulatory, bureaucratic checks and balances that basically stop self-centred, vicious arseholes from ripping off everybody they meet and victimising anybody who's not strong enough to stand up to them in the street, that's all being dismantled. And by a kind of a cups and peas sleight of hand, there's so much outrage and scandal and excitement being generated by all the other strange and weird stuff that's going on. The momentum for the change is almost self-sustaining. I mean, there is a momentum to resist, but I think there's still at least 30% of the American population who approve of the way Trump is shaking up the economy and looking for waste and mismanagement and inefficiency. Like, as if there hasn't been a push to contain waste and inefficiency forever in government circles. Like, when was it that the first elected politician decided to go chasing votes by accusing their opposition of funding wasteful, over-regulatory bureaucrats to annoy the taxpayers and the citizenry? You know, would it be 100 years or 200 years, or, you know, like, when did voting begin sort of thing? Sometime after the Magna Carta. So today's really big news was that on the one hand, in the US there is a scarcity of kidney transplant specialists. In the other hand, there was a Lebanese-born national kidney transplant specialist who had a special technician genius level H2B visa or whatever the paperwork digits are, but she was in America with great appreciation of the hospital she was working at, because she was caring for a bunch of people who were getting donor kidneys transplanted into them. Now that sort of thing doesn't happen often in public hospitals, so she would have been working at a private hospital, and I think it was a university that was sponsoring her to be there. She went back to Lebanon to visit friends and relatives, VFR as they call it, and while she was there she went to a funeral at which about 10,000 people attended. They were having the funeral for the leader of Hezbollah. She took photos of it on her phone. When she tried to come back into America, where she was lawfully a resident, teaching at a university and working at a university hospital and caring for Americans, she was put in the lockup for 36 hours, and then, contrary to judge's orders, she was flown out to Paris on the way back to Lebanon because she'd attended that funeral. While the shit was bouncing off the fan from that one, Trumpy, who has apparently declared a state of
national wartime emergency against Venezuelan gangs, had 269 of them locked up for having tattoos and looking Mexican. Or, no, looking Venezuelan. Anybody know how to tell a Venezuelan looking from a Mexican looking? Because I bloody don't. And once again, the judge said, no, you're not allowed to deport them to Colombia, where there's a government-sponsored private enterprise prison built to house 40,000 political prisoners and undesirables. The president of Colombia put the military through the country and basically locked up anybody who was young and male and unemployed and had a tattoo. Put them all in a concentration camp. So the US taxpayer at Donald Trump's executive directive are paying Colombia to basically restrain, contain, imprison, beat and otherwise ill-treat these 260 alleged Venezuelan invaders, because that's the language of his bill, invoking wartime emergency powers that go back to 1798 and have otherwise only previously been used in the War of 1812, in the First World War and in the Second World War. Not so much to intern Japanese-born Americans or Japanese naturalised Americans, but to deport Japanese citizens during wartime straight back to Japan, not even put them in a camp in America, just get rid of them. So you'd have to say that Trumpy is drawing an enormously long bow. Meanwhile, because the value of Tesla's stocks has dropped about 50-something% since Trump was inaugurated, because of the fact that Elon Musk's net worth is pegged to the value of Tesla shares, because that's what he borrows against in order to have ready cash to finance his projects and live his own life. When the value of Tesla stocks is 100 or 200 times the normal price to earnings ratio, he's considered a genius and he's the richest man in the world. But as far as I know, he's lost pretty close to $150 billion in terms of his net worth determined by how much of Tesla stock he owns and therefore how much he can borrow. I have no idea where they're going to go from here, but I reckon there's a pretty fair chance that the 19th of April forecast might even be a bit too far in the future. I mean, the people that Trump and Musk have alienated are all the people who actually sort of care enough about civics to understand how it works. That's why they were prepared to work in the industries that they did, because they believe in the goodness of the underlying cause, that being the USA as a society and a civilization, or the swamp wallaby, hope it's not one of my friends, dedicated to the pursuit of life, liberty and happiness. As I said on an earlier one of these Chronicles, when whomsoever it is decides to cry havoc and announce the counter coup or the second revolution or whatever you want to call it, They are going to have the best trained, qualified, experienced pool of potential recruits that anybody who ever wanted to revolt ever had. The big fly in the ointment as far as the Constitution is concerned is that for the past 8 years since Trump first came to power, every television monitor in every public area in every US military base, National Guard, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, all those TVs have been hardwired to Fox Entertainment, labelled as, quote, news, unquote. So the regular military, if they've been in there for less than 8 or 10 years, I'd say they're going to believe in whatever the God King Emperor Trump tells them to do. It's a long time since high school kids in America knew what they were talking about in terms of where America fought, what battles in World War I and World War II, and why they were there and what it was all about. Shit, 21% of them are totally bloody illiterate, and another 54% could not pass a reading and comprehension test set at grade 6 in Australian primary school. So between the 54% who can't pass a primary school reading, writing and comprehension test and the 21% who can't read or write at all, that's 75% of the US citizenry no better able to reason than a kid in their final year of primary school. The entire premise of a representative democracy is that the electorate is supposed to be smart enough not to elect dickheads or rogues or fraudsters or grifters. He's got to wait for me. Yeah. As I also said in an earlier Trumpocalypse Chronicle, it is literally as if the collective foreign interference and manipulation that the US has done all around the world for the past 200 years, 250 years, is all now coming back to bite them in the bum. I mean, the motivation of Vladimir Putin to completely destroy the US economy and government and administration in order that they should understand what they did to his country when Ronald Reagan, commanding the US Air Force to build and deploy the Strategic Defence Initiative, aka Star Wars, which was cooked up by a couple of science fiction writers who took a theoretical paper by Edward Teller and convinced Ronald Reagan that they could build satellites with microwave lasers fueled by hydrogen bombs in space to cook the bloody Russian or Soviet launch vehicles in the ascent phase, and therefore America could have a lot of atom bombs on rockets, but nobody could bomb America with atom bombs on rockets. And the Soviet Union attempted, seriously attempted, to build more atom bombs on more rockets than the Strategic Defence Initiative could possibly cope with, even though it was physically impossible to construct any kind of a functional, let alone deployable or reliable strategic defence initiative. It was the greatest bloody con job, bluff and military industrial boondoggle in the history of warriorism. W-O-R-R-I-E-R-ism, warriorism. They who are professional worriers, they spend all day getting paid to worry about what they have to think about next week that might go wrong and be a threat to them. Let's go into Eco at 14 kilometres and see how much the range extends, because I don't want to go much faster than about 30k on this dirt road, and I have discovered that you only go 34, 35 in economy mode on a flat road, but it will go up hills like this one. We're doing 26 kilometres an hour and 30. Yeah, so it won't take that much longer to get there, but I have a feeling that it'll use considerably less electricities. So, kind of lost the train of which facet of the American disaster I was looking at. Yeah, the bit about the military and how much of the regular military in uniform at the moment is going to obey what the Nuremberg court would have said were unlawful orders, and what some later tribunal will probably say were unlawful orders. And, you know, Donald Trump's not much on history, but he has always apparently thought that the US fought on the wrong side in World War II. In his view, they should have been fighting with Germany, but of course his grandfather was German. By now, all the commentators from European think tanks are all openly speaking about the fact that there might not be a kill switch on the F-35, but there certainly is a level of throttling that's possible in terms of software updates and consumable supplies. The British have also got that sour taste in their mouth at the thought that, yeah, they can build submarines and they can build thermonuclear warheads to go on a missile in their submarines, but the missiles themselves are American. So Britain does not actually have any kind of an independent nuclear, quote, deterrence. France has, and the French are feeling particularly clever with themselves for all those years blowing up Mururoa Atoll, making sure they had the force to crap. That setup they cooked up the time they indulged in state terrorism in New Zealand, sinking the Rainbow Warrior with limpet mines delivered by scuba divers masquerading as newlyweds on holidays. But anyway, it means that France is now stationing French Air Force nuclear bombers, like jet intruders that will carry a nuclear gravity bomb, on German airfields to make sure that Europe and NATO has actually got a reliable nuclear umbrella, because they don't believe they can rely on the US to back Europe if Europe has to have a fight with Russia. And I don't know how many Americans have got their head around just how stunned the rest of the world is and how far-reaching those ramifications are. In the same vein that the government liquor stores in Canada have removed all US manufactured alcohol from their shelves, they'd already bought it, they'd paid for it, so they're sticking it in the warehouse and they're just refusing to sell that stuff because, you know, they don't want their population to be encouraged to buy anything made in the USA. And apparently they've been pretty cunning about making sure that anything that's made in the state that voted for MAGA to put the president in the White House, everything that comes out of their state and goes into Canada is topping the tariff. Putin, at the same time, has sort of caught himself in a trap of his own making. As I mentioned, on the one hand, he can't afford for the war to stop because he's got no method of coping with the disgruntlement of all those veterans coming home at once. He'll be just like Gorbachev after the Soviets were removed from Afghanistan. So what he'd like is to continue the war nibbling away, counting on the fact that the US is going to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine because the US president is a wholly controlled agent of Kremlin. In fact, I'm increasingly tagging him in my mind as the Kremlin's Quisling. He's an American citizen who's entirely in the thrall and at the beck and call of a hostile foreign power. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be coming up here at much more than 30 kilometres an hour, and in economy mode it'll do it. (42 watt-hours per kilometre). We've used about 16% of the battery to get here. And meanwhile, poor little Elon, nobody wants to buy anything that he makes. Entire countries are cancelling Starlink contracts. People are graffitiing and setting fire to Teslas of all different kinds, pretty much all over the place. I haven't heard of any Teslas being graffitied in Australia, but Tesla sales in Australia have dropped by 49%. Corrugation's the bane of one's life. Force you to ride on the wrong side of the bloody road. Which I friggin' hate doing. I'd rather stand on the foot pegs lightly and just cope with the bumps. Get on the clay pan, it's not too bad, it's the fill that forms the ripples. Yeah, so Elon's crashing. And salary's bloody skyrockets. To hazard a guess, I'd suggest that all of his engine tests, which have been done with his skyrocket hanging on the arms of they call them the chopsticks, on his launch tower, which they call Mechazilla, because they can't bloody call anything by a sensible name. It's always got to be built in the cartoon. Now, when you've got a rocket held down about 30% from the nose to the tail by its two pins on the chopsticks, and it's bolted down by the hold down clamps down level with the engines. They come in from the side. Then all of the vibration which occurs during engine running is getting transferred to solid structures, slightly flexible in the form of the Mechazilla arms, but pretty bloody rigid when it comes to the hold down clamps. So all that enormous amount of kinetic energy and the vibration is being restrained by those hold down points. However, when he flies it up into the sky, the version 1 used to have a methane downpipe, big fat one that came all the way down from the methane tank at the front, right through the centre of the oxygen tank. And that methane tank was right on the central axis, and the fluid was sloshing around it. And they might have been apparently concerned about getting a steady fuel flow of methane to the 3 vacuum engines. But for whatever reason, they brought the Block 2 out, and it had one big methane riser in the middle, but not as big as the old one, because it was augmented by 3 individual methane downpipes, one running from the methane tank to each one of the vacuum engines. And the methane downpipes had lots of like flanges, circumferential flanges, as if they were short lengths of pipe which had been bolted together or joined together on the flanges. So any fluid trying to slosh around would get a fair bit of hydrodynamic friction going past these flanged methane down tubes. And both the new Block 2 versions have got to about the same point in the trajectory where they'd burnt maybe 2/3 of the oxygen and maybe 2/3 of the methane. And then all of a sudden, big problems in the engine department, fire and then explosion. Or fire, asymmetric thrust, engines going out and then explosions. And all the smartest head-scratching boffins and commentators, they're all saying that what seems to be going on is there's vibrations in these down tubes full of methane, which when the oxygen tank is full, the vibrations are transferred from the down tubes via these flanged fin looking things into the liquid, and therefore the actual amplitude and the frequency and the savagery of the vibration in the down tube is being ameliorated, minimised, slowed down. But it occurs to me that when you're in free flight, any vibration which used to be damped by contact with something solid like planet Earth, that vibration is now utterly undamped and only contained by the rigidity of the airframe and the structure. And it's not a phenomenon that too many people will have encountered, but I think you can probably follow a description of it. My experience dates back to 1992 when I was beginning flight testing in a little ultralight motor glider which featured a very narrow undercarriage with a floating axle and bungee shock cords in tension. So the whole weight was sort of balanced on the stretchiness of the bungee cords. And the engine was two-cylinder horizontally opposed, 22 horsepower, and both the cylinders fired at the same time. So there was a hell of a torsional vibration. You know, every action has a reaction, and just as much power was transmitted to twist the crankshaft was transmitted to twist the crankcase the other way. And these engine vibrations were transferred through the mountings to a long rectangular tapered or slightly tapered rectangular trapezoidal box, you know, broader at the bottom than at the top, slightly narrower at the front than at the back. And it had the three mounting points of the engine onto this hollowed monocoque sheet metal box, very rigid in torsion, tension, compression, and that was attached to the main body of the airframe. Coming down from that big central point where everything was attached, there were two vertical upright tubes, and balanced or attached across them was the instrument panel. So every time the two cylinders fired, the crankshaft got a big impulse to turn the propeller clockwise as seen from the back pilot's seat. There was an equal and opposite reaction which turned the crankcase anti-clockwise, and the crankcase twisted this rectangular trapezoidal box anti-clockwise along its long axis, and that transmitted that torsional vibration into the structure. And if you look behind you could see the horizontal stabilizer was wriggling, sort of rolling and rolling back. There we go, like that. And it meant that when you're on the ground, you could run the engine and you could read all the instruments. And when you were taxiing slowly on the ground, you could run the engine and you could read all the instruments. When you had the engine going full power, everything sort of smoothed out because the vibration didn't have time to do anything before the next one followed it. So everything was humming rather than shaking, and you could read all the instruments. And that was great. And when you took off, you were mainly flying at full power because it was horribly underpowered. And like I said, at full power, 4,200 revs per minute, there was 4,200 babangs per minute. So you could read all the instruments. First time you tried to throttle back and go gliding, you couldn't see where the bloody dials were on the instrument panel, let alone where the needles were on the dial, because there was nowhere for the vibration to go, and the whole thing was shaking like a dog trying to get rid of fleas. Now I think something very, very similar has happened to Elon Musk's Skyrocket. I think the only possible cures are for him to make everything a whole lot stiffer, and he's going to have to contrive to run some vibration tests at full power in a vacuum, or at full power when flying, and get data back, and then redesign and rebuild everything so that it's strong enough to cope with the stresses the machine actually experiences, rather than the stresses he decided it was going to be most convenient to engineer to put up with if he met them. I think the real world's starting to bite Elon in many different ways. One of the most humorous to watch, hilarious actually, there's I don't know whether he's ex-NASA engineer or still is a NASA engineer, but he's a big-time YouTuber called Mark Rober, R-O-B-E-R. Does some absolutely harebrained things, and he does some brilliant things, and sometimes he does some legally questionable things. like building booby trap packages to put on the doorstep, which will cover any potential thief with skunk scent while scattering glitter in all directions and laughing maniacally and taking videos of them all at the same time. But his latest exercise in curiosity was he wanted to find out what actually happens when you get a Tesla on autopilot, which is totally camera based, and you drive it on the road towards a Wile E. Coyote type of a brick wall across the road with scenery painted on the wall. What will a Tesla do? And, you know, like, people have actually written research papers theorising about such a situation. So being a good YouTuber as he is, Mark Rober decided to talk about it, and he figured out 6 tests that he wanted to run between a car that's got LiDAR, which is basically radar that uses lasers, and a Tesla which runs on cameras. And in order to explain how good LiDAR is, he looked very carefully at his legal consultants, and he found a loophole in Disney's list of what you're not allowed to take into a thing called Space Mountain roller coaster, which is a roller coaster in the dark inside a building. Charming bloody road surface, this one. So basically he got a chest mounted LiDAR and a big loose hoodie that he could wear over the top of it, and he paid for his ticket, and he got on one of the cars and he went around and he mapped the inside of the whole thing, and then he got the bloke who builds, fixes or sells the bloody LiDAR to crunch the numbers and give him a computer program, which he then fed to a 3D printer, so he was able to print out and assemble a tabletop model of what's inside the big containment structure over the top of the Space Mountain roller coaster at Disneyland. And that would normally be the complete total point of anybody else's YouTube movie, but no, all he did that for was to demonstrate to his viewers what LiDAR can do. Then he set up his tests with a Tesla on cameras and another car on LiDAR, and he tried a pedestrian standing still and they both worked, and he tried a pedestrian jumping out in between obstacles and they both worked, and then they tried a pedestrian in fog and the Tesla run into him. I think that the Tesla also run into the pedestrian in rain. And the big one was when they tried the Tesla and the LiDAR controlled car against the, well, it was a foam styrene wall, and they knew what was going to happen, and they'd already pre-cut the segments of the wall so that when the Tesla hit it, the wall burst out in a very spectacular cartoon Roadrunner and Coyote style of a sharp starburst edge pattern. But yeah, they got the LiDAR car to drive at a foam styrene wall with a printed picture of the other side of the wall fixed onto it, and the LiDAR controlled car drove up to it and stopped at a safe distance, no drama. And then he got in the Tesla, and the Tesla drove straight through the wall at 40 miles an hour. And I don't know how long Mark Rober had been planning that movie, and I don't know how long it would have taken him to put it together. But just as Tesla stock had dropped by, 46%, sales in Australia dropped by 76%, sales in Germany dropped by 76%, sales in China dropped by 45%. Like all around the world, nobody's buying Teslas. The second-hand price of them is falling out the bottom of the bucket. Nobody wants to buy one no matter how cheap they are, because they know if they go anywhere in it, they're going to get pretty much castigated and reviled for supporting Elon Musk by being in a Tesla. And not many people want to do that. So yeah, just as he thought he was going to have a real good time with his Tesla, selling them on the White House lawn. Oh look, it's only $35,000 for a Tesla. Yeah, but $35,000 for a Tesla with a camera controlled autopilot that doesn't bloody work, versus $14,000 for one that comes out of China and the autopilot does work, because it's LiDAR based. So, speaking of based, if you base your judgment on the amount of ketamine that Elon Musk is supposed to be eating, and you look at his performance when people try to interview him, he's almost completely inarticulate, and he seems to have nothing to say to defend himself against accusations that he's just destroying the fabric of American civilization. You can see why Putin wants that done, but as to why Musk is doing it, I gotta say, we apply Machiavelli's rule. Who does it benefit to get rid of everybody who guards the guardians, so to speak, and run a coup in the United States controlled by uneducated, right-wing, white supremacist Christian nationalists? How long has Elon Musk and Donald Trump been saying that there should be subsidies for the poor, oppressed white refugees in South Africa to be brought to America? Is J.D. Vance, the Vice President, is he not the prodigy of a fellow called Peter Thiel, who's another white South African billionaire migrant? Is it beyond the bounds of possibility to hypothesise that whereas most of the richest, nastiest white South Africans who run away from Nelson Mandela's free democratic South Africa, whereas most of them come to Australia and the nastiest of them, they live behind barbed wire and fences in armed, guarded, gated communities in the outskirts of Perth, because when they run away from South Africa, it never occurred to them that coming to Australia meant they wouldn't be allowed to carry guns. Elon and Thiel, and presumably a few more of them, back to sport. 27s, that was 13 kilometres, going slow, 72%. Don't know that we saved that much. We'll find out when I get home, I suppose. I think Elon's gone over there and he's been working for quite a while to try and turn America into South Africa. Only he's the boss. And if you remember, Elon's mother moved to South Africa as a child because her father was a bloody Canadian Nazi who particularly desperately wanted to move somewhere where he could practice his racist beliefs. And Elon's father put 2 babies into Elon's stepsister's home. Fairly badly damaged little unit, is Elon. Here we go, 28 kilometres. $39.98. 50 minutes. Average speed 34. Maximum speed 54. And I don't think I did any different average speed than the time I made that trip in sport the whole way. So on a road like that, there's no point being in sport because you won't be able to use any of the power because the road's too bloody rough. You might as well stay in economy and just let the computer control your top speed. But yeah, I still say April the 19th is when the Americans are going to start being very, very nasty to each other. I claim the date based on a hunch. And yeah, they're in the middle of a constitutional crisis. The executive branch is ignoring the judicial branch, and the legislative branch is sitting on its hands and saying, oh, it's okay. The people voted for Donald by about a 1.5% majority, perhaps. He did not win the majority of the vote. He won the majority of the two-party preferred split. Refrigerated logistics. As I've said before, everything on every shelf in every shop in every town all over Australia comes into town in a truck that runs on diesel. And we don't make any diesel. We import all of it. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Going to be fun when Trumpy shuts down the global international trading economy, isn't it? Ciao.